In the red corner, you have the United States of America, armed with a defense budget of $850 billion. That is more money than the next 9 countries combined. In the blue corner, you have Denmark, a quiet Scandinavian kingdom with a defense budget of just $78 billion. By every single metric of warfare, this fight should have been over in 10 minutes. Washington should have been able to snap its fingers and take whatever it wanted. But they didn't. Instead, the United States just walked into the most humiliating geopolitical bear trap of the 21st century. Donald Trump didn't just ask to buy Greenland, he threatened to take it. He broke the unwritten rule of the Arctic. He treated 56,000 sovereign citizens like tenants in a foreclosure. He thought he was making a real estate deal. He thought he could bully a small ally into submission, but he was wrong. While Washington was shouting about ownership, Canada and Denmark were quietly rewriting the laws of the North. They didn't build a wall, they built a shield. And today, we are going to show you exactly how the smallest nations on Earth used a secret diplomatic weapon to cage a superpower. This isn't a story about a failed purchase. This is the story of the Arctic Shield Protocol. If a superpower demanded your territory tomorrow, would your government cave or would they fight? Tell me in the comments, because the map you think you know has already changed. For decades, the Arctic ran on a ghost protocol. It was an unwritten rule that no one dared to break. The United States dominated the region militarily, allies deferred quietly, and Greenland existed in a carefully managed balance. It worked precisely because it stayed invisible. No one talked about ownership, no one threatened borders. Then, Donald Trump detonated the old order. He didn't just float an idea, he escalated. When asked if he would use military force to acquire the island, he refused to rule it out. That single sentence stopped the Arctic from being a background theater and turned it into a frontline crisis. This was not a dispute with a rival like Russia or China. This was a NATO superpower threatening the territory of another NATO member. Imagine being in Nuuk, a capital city of just 20,000 people. You are watching the news, and the President of the United States is discussing your home, not as a country, but as a strategic asset to be acquired. He isn't talking about people, he is talking about mineral rights and missile defense. The Danish government wasn't just annoyed, they were terrified. They feared their kingdom was about to be shrunk by a Trumpian heist. They saw what happened in Venezuela. They saw the America First steamroller, and they realized the terrifying truth. The assumption that American power was protective had collapsed. Suddenly, silence was no longer safety. Silence was a risk. If threats against Greenland were normalized, then no Arctic border was truly secure. Not Denmark's, not Greenland's, and definitely not Canada's. The bully had entered the room, and he wasn't asking for a seat. He was demanding the deed to the house. In moments like this, most countries try to disappear into diplomatic language. They issue a statement of concern and hope the storm passes. Canada did the opposite. When Trump's Greenland posture hardened, Ottawa made a calculation that reshaped the Arctic map. They realized that remaining neutral would signal acceptance. Delaying would invite escalation. So, they chose to weaponize their presence. Mark Carney stood beside Denmark's Prime Minister in Paris and drew a sovereignty line that left zero ambiguity. He didn't just offer support, he offered a shield.
Then, Canada backed that declaration with a move that was pure tactical genius. They announced the immediate opening of a permanent Canadian consulate in Nuuk. Now, to the untrained eye, opening a consulate sounds boring. It sounds like paperwork. But in the world of high-stakes geopolitics, this was a kill shot. Canada transformed the crisis from rhetoric into reality. A consulate is not symbolism. It is institutional weight. It is diplomats. It is security coordination. It is intelligence sharing. And most importantly, it is permanent presence. Canada planted a flag inside the house at the exact moment Washington was banging on the door. By embedding itself physically in Greenland, Ottawa created a sovereignty tripwire. If the United States wanted to move on Greenland now, they wouldn't just be pushing around a small Danish territory, they would be tripping over a G7 partner. They would be colliding with the Canadian government on the ground. And the effect was immediate. The bully tactics relied on isolation. Trump needed Denmark to feel alone, but suddenly the equation changed. This is where the alliance of the abandoned kicked in. What had been framed in Washington as a simple bilateral deal turned into a multilateral nightmare. Denmark was no longer standing alone. Germany, the United Kingdom, and France looked at the map and realized the danger. If the U.S. could annex Greenland, the entire North Atlantic security architecture would collapse. So they stepped in. We saw a surge in coordination. European powers began publicly affirming Greenland's sovereignty. The conflict shifted from "Can the U.S. take Greenland?" to "Can the U.S. afford to fight all its allies at once?" Trump wanted to isolate the island to make the purchase easier. Instead, his aggression acted like a magnet, drawing the most powerful nations in Europe into a tight defensive knot around Nuke. The America First strategy didn't just fail, it backfired. It unified the very people it was trying to divide. Washington lost control of the narrative because they forgot the golden rule of modern power. You cannot buy a country that has friends. Once the diplomatic tripwire was set, the Allies realized a brutal truth. They could not outspend the United States. They could not outshoot the United States, but they could outsee them. The strategy shifted instantly from defense to total visibility. This is the surveillance cage. If you can't stop the giant from moving, you make sure the entire world watches every single step he takes. Germany, the UK, and France began discussing a joint Arctic surveillance framework, often described as the Arctic Century. The concept is terrifyingly simple: persistent monitoring. They didn't deploy thousands of troops, they deployed sensors. Maritime patrol aircraft like the P-8 Poseidon began sweeping the ice. Satellite tracking grids were tightened. Undersea detection networks were activated. The Arctic stopped being a dark room. It became a fully lit stage. Suddenly, the United States Navy couldn't move a submarine or an icebreaker near Greenland without triggering a sensor controlled by a European ally. The logistics wall went up. It wasn't made of concrete, it was made of data. Washington wanted total control. Instead, they found themselves in a glass house. Every unilateral move now carries a political price tag because it is seen, recorded, and broadcast to the entire alliance in real time. And here is the ultimate irony, the twist that makes this entire crisis look like a strategic suicide by the White House. The United States already had everything it claimed to need. Look at the map. At the center of this fight sits the Pituffik Space Base, formerly known as Thule Air Base. This is one of the most critical early warning installations in the Western world. Its radar feeds directly into North American missile defense. It tracks ballistic launches across the Arctic long before they reach the continental United States. This base exists today. It operates today. And it already gives Washington the security access it claims to be fighting for. Nothing in Greenland blocks U.S. military operations. There is no denied access. There is no hostile force. So why demand ownership? The answer is the kill shot of this entire saga. The push was not about defense. It was about control. The moment Trump demanded the deed, he proved that the alliance wasn't enough for him. And in doing so, he destroyed the trust that made the alliance work. He wanted to own the island to secure his flank. Instead, he triggered a surveillance network that has locked his forces into a permanent state of observation. He didn't checkmate the enemy, he checkmated himself. So what is the final verdict of the Arctic Shield Protocol?
It is the ultimate proof of the boomerang effect. Donald Trump launched this campaign to expand American territory. He wanted a submissive neighbor and a 51st state. Instead, he created his own isolation. He wanted to secure the North. Instead, he forced Canada and Europe to build a security architecture that explicitly excludes the United States from unilateral control. He didn't just lose the deal, he lost the trust. The lesson here is brutal but simple. In the 21st century, you cannot buy a country that has friends, and you cannot bully a nation that knows its own value. Canada didn't win this fight with missiles, they won it with presence. They won it by understanding that a flag in Nuuk is worth more than a fleet in the Atlantic. The Arctic is secure, for now. The for sale sign has been taken down, but don't get comfortable, because while the ice is safe, the real battle is moving south. The next crisis isn't about land, it's about water. And Washington is already looking at the Great Lakes with thirsty eyes. The SHIELD protocol worked in the north, but will it work when they come for the fresh water? Subscribe to the channel right now. In the next video, we are going to expose the secret battle for the Great Lakes and the nuclear option Canada is preparing to protect them. You do not want to miss that.